Hello, dear friend. Welcome back to the Sleeping Tones. Tonight, we drift into the world of a composer who taught music to breathe, who showed us that silence can sing, and who proved that beauty need not shout to be heard. Tonight, we explore the life and legacy of Claude Debussy, a man who changed music forever with whispers rather than declarations, who painted with sound, and who left behind a legacy that still shimmers like moonlight on water. So settle into your pillows, let the weight of the day dissolve, and allow yourself to be carried away by the story of this remarkable soul, this rebel who became a revolutionary, this dreamer who showed the world new ways to hear. It is a warm summer morning in the small French town of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, just west of Paris. The date is August 22nd, 1862. Sunlight filters through lace curtains in a modest apartment at number 38, Rue aux Pins, the street of bread. Inside, at 4:30 in the morning, a newborn draws his first breath. His parents name him Achille Claude Debussy. The world will come to know him simply as Claude Debussy, though he will spend years trying various combinations of his names, signing his youthful works as Achille, later as Achille Claude, before finally settling on Claude, the name that feels most authentically his own. Nothing about the room suggests history in the making. The walls are plain. The furniture is worn. The apartment sits above a small shop where his father, Manuel Achille Debussy, sells china and porcelain. Business is never good. His mother, Victorine Manoury, works as a seamstress when she is not tending to their growing family. They are neither wealthy nor destitute. They occupy that uncertain space between poverty and respectability, a space where hope lives alongside worry, where ambition meets the daily struggle to survive. Manuel Debussy is a restless man, a dreamer who never quite finds his footing. Before Claude's birth, he tried his hand at various trades, printing, traveling sales, anything to keep food on the table. He has military experience from his youth, discipline learned in the Marine infantry. But civilian life proves harder to navigate. He reads popular novels. He attends the theater when he can afford it. He fancies himself cultured, a man of taste trapped in circumstances beneath his dignity. Victorine, meanwhile, keeps the household running with quiet determination. She is practical where he is idealistic, steady where he is volatile. She is described as highly emotional, prone to strong reactions, but also capable of enduring hardship with stoic resilience. We know less about her than about Manuel, as is often the case with women of that era. But her strength will be the foundation that allows young Claude to survive a chaotic childhood. By the time Claude is 2 years old, the china shop has failed. The family leaves Saint-Germain-en-Laye and moves to Paris, first to Clichy to stay with Victorine's mother, Edmé Manoury, then to various apartments as Manuel searches for work. They settle eventually on Rue Saint-Honoré. Each move brings new neighbors, new streets, new sounds. The young Claude absorbs it all. The rhythm of carriage wheels on cobblestone, the calls of street vendors selling vegetables and coal, the bells of distant churches marking the hours, the particular music of human conversation rising and falling like tides, the whistles of trains, the clatter of construction, the hum of a city transforming itself. Paris in the 1860s is a city being torn apart and rebuilt. Baron Haussmann is carving wide boulevards through medieval neighborhoods. Old buildings are demolished. New apartment blocks rise. The city is modernizing, becoming the Paris we recognize today. But the transformation is violent and disorienting for those who live through it. But the most formative sound of Claude's childhood comes not from modernization, but from revolution. In 1870, when Claude is 7 years old, France goes to war with Prussia. It is supposed to be a quick victory, a chance for Emperor Napoleon III to reassert French dominance in Europe. Instead, it is a disaster. The French army is crushed. The emperor is captured. The empire collapses. Prussia lays siege to Paris. The city starves through the winter. People eat horses, then cats and dogs, then rats. The animals in the zoo are slaughtered for meat. The Debussy family flees before the siege tightens. They go to Cannes, to the home of Manuel's sister Clémentine, where the Mediterranean sun shines and food remains plentiful, where war seems like a distant rumor. It is here, in Cannes, that young Claude first encounters a piano. An Italian musician named Jean Cerruti gives him lessons. The boy's hands are small, but his ears are extraordinary. Cerruti recognizes something unusual, a gift, an instinct for sound that cannot be taught. When the war ends in humiliation for France, the Debussy family returns to Paris. But the city they return to is not the city they left. A new government has been declared, not a restoration of monarchy or empire, but something unprecedented, the Paris Commune, a radical experiment in self-governance that terrifies the conservative establishment and inspires the working poor. The Commune lasts only 2 months, from March to May of 1871. But those 2 months will shape French politics and culture for decades. The communards, as they are called, believe in democracy, in secularism, in the rights of workers. They cancel rents. They separate church from state. They declare that women should have equal rights. For a brief moment, it seems as though a new world might be possible. Manuel Debussy, ever the idealist, joins the National Guard of the Commune. He becomes a captain. For the first time in his life, he feels important, necessary, part of something larger than his own failed ambitions. He drills his men. He mans barricades. He believes. But the dream is short-lived. In May of 1871, during what will be remembered as Bloody Week, the French army retakes Paris street by street. Barricades are stormed. Prisoners are shot without trial. Thousands of communards are executed, their bodies piled in mass graves or thrown into the Seine. The repression is savage. Manuel Debussy is arrested. He escapes execution, perhaps through luck, perhaps through connections. But he is sentenced to 4 years in prison. The sentence is later reduced, then commuted entirely. He is released, but the family is marked. They are the family of a traitor, a revolutionary, a man who dared to defy the natural order. For the young Claude, the lesson sinks in quietly but deeply. Authority is not sacred. Rules are made by people, and people are fallible. The world that demands obedience is the same world that failed his father, that failed Paris, that failed France. And in the softest harmonies he will later write, in every refusal to resolve a chord the way tradition demands, in every piece that floats without anchoring, that childhood lesson will echo. Authority can be resisted. Beauty can exist outside the rules. Order is not the only way. After the Commune, the Debussy family's fortunes sink lower. Money is scarce. Manuel finds work where he can, as a clerk, as a printer's assistant, but his reputation follows him. Former communards are not trusted. Employers hire him reluctantly and fire him quickly. They move again and again. Claude grows up in apartments that smell of damp plaster and boiled cabbage, where thin walls let every argument and every sob filter through, where winter means huddling near a small stove and summer means airless rooms that trap the heat. Yet in this instability, something unexpected happens. A family friend, a woman named Madame Motet de Fleurville, offers to give Claude piano lessons. She claims, though the claim may be exaggerated, to have been a student of the great Polish composer Frédéric Chopin. Whether this is entirely true remains uncertain, but what matters is that she possesses skill, patience, and an intuition about the peculiar child who sits at her worn upright piano. Madame Motet does not force him into rigid exercises. She does not drill him mercilessly in scales and arpeggios. Instead, she lets him explore. She lets him discover sound by touch, by ear, by instinct. She shows him how notes relate to each other, how chords are built, how melodies can move. But she also gives him freedom, and in that freedom, something blooms. Claude's hands are small, but his ears are extraordinary. He can hear the overtones in a single note, the way a chord colors a room, the difference between a melody that resolves and one that lingers like a question mark hanging in the air. He can remember complex passages after hearing them once, and most remarkably, he improvises. Not the usual childhood noodling, but actual musical ideas, fragments that have shape and character, phrases that sound like they belong to someone who has been composing for years. Within months, it becomes clear that Claude has a gift, not the polished, obedient gift of a prodigy who performs parlor tricks for admiring adults, but something stranger, something that makes people uncomfortable. He plays scales, yes, but he plays them with odd intervals, with chromatic slides that sound almost modal, almost ancient, almost like church music from centuries past. He plays etudes, but he changes them, adding notes that are not on the page, altering rhythms to make them more interesting. Madame Motet recognizes what she cannot quite name. She speaks to patrons, to friends, to anyone who might help this peculiar boy from this troubled family. And in 1872, when Claude is just 10 years old, she arranges for him to audition for the Paris Conservatoire. The audition takes place in the grand building on the Rue du Conservatoire. Claude is nervous. He has never been in a place so imposing. The judges sit behind a table. They ask him to play. He plays. They ask him to sight read. He sight reads. They give him a melody and ask him to harmonize it at the keyboard. He does. But his harmonization is unconventional. He uses chords that surprise them. The judges hesitate. His technique is raw. He has not been trained in the proper manner. He makes mistakes that no well-schooled child would make. His posture at the piano is awkward. His fingering is inefficient. He has obvious gaps in his education. And yet, there is something undeniable in the way he approaches the instrument. A spark, an imagination, a refusal to be ordinary. One of the judges asks him to play something he has composed himself. Claude improvises. For 3 minutes, he creates something that has never existed before. And the judges lean forward, listening. They admit him. For the boy from Saint-Germain-en-Laye, the boy from the family of a failed revolutionary, the conservatoire feels like a temple of order. It is a place where genius is measured, where talent is refined, where the chaos of the streets gives way to the crystalline logic of counterpoint and fugue. It is a world of possibilities, but it is also, in its own way, a cage. The Paris Conservatoire of the 1870s is a world unto itself. It sits on the Rue du Conservatoire in the 9th arrondissement, a grand building filled with practice rooms where students drill scales for hours, where the smell of rosin mingles with ambition, where every hallway hums with the sound of someone trying to be perfect. The institution was founded in 1795, during the chaos of the French Revolution, and it carries with it the weight of tradition, the accumulated wisdom of nearly a century of musical education. For a boy like Claude Debussy, a boy from a family marked by scandal, a boy with no connections and no money, admission to the conservatoire is both a gift and a burden. It means opportunity. It means the possibility of a future. It means meals in the student dining hall and access to pianos and libraries and teachers. But it also means conformity. It means learning to speak a language that feels, to his ears, increasingly artificial. It means being judged according to standards that do not accommodate deviation. The Conservatoire's curriculum is rigorous and methodical. Students begin with solfège, the system of sight singing that trains the ear to recognize intervals and rhythms. They use the syllables do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, singing exercises that grow progressively more difficult. They learn to identify chords by ear. They learn to write melodic dictation, to hear a melody once and notate it accurately. They progress to harmony, learning how chords function, how dominant sevenths resolve to tonics, how modulations move from one key to another. They study counterpoint, the art of combining independent melodic lines according to strict rules about which intervals are consonant and which are dissonant. They analyze the fugues of Bach, the sonatas of Beethoven, the symphonies of Haydn and Mozart. And through it all, there is an unspoken assumption that these rules, these traditions, represent the pinnacle of musical achievement, that the great composers of the past discovered the natural laws of music, and that to be a composer is to master these laws. And then perhaps, if one is very talented and very lucky, to add a few personal touches within the established framework. Claude Debussy does not fit the mold. He is small for his age, barely 5 feet tall even as a teenager, dark-haired, quiet, watchful. His face is round, his features delicate, almost feminine. He has large, expressive eyes that seem to take in everything. He wears a dark jacket that has seen better days, patched at the elbows, too short in the sleeves. His classmates find him odd. He does not make friends easily. He does not join in their games or gossip. He does not charm his teachers with flattery or deference. He does not dazzle at the piano competitions that other students prepare for with monastic discipline. Instead, he questions, he experiments, he irritates. During piano lessons, when he is supposed to be practicing scales and etudes, he improvises. His hands wander over the keyboard, finding intervals that sound strange, chords that shimmer without resolving, progressions that seem to float rather than march. His teachers correct him. They tell him that these sounds are wrong, but to Debussy, they do not sound wrong. They sound interesting. They sound alive. They sound like the world sounds, like rain on windows, like distant bells, like voices murmuring in adjacent rooms. His first piano teacher at the Conservatoire is Antoine François Marmontel, a pianist of considerable reputation who has trained many successful performers. Marmontel is in his 60s now, a practical man who understands the realities of a musical career. To succeed as a pianist in the 1870s, one must master the standard repertoire. One must win competitions. One must impress audiences with technical brilliance and interpretive insight. One must play Chopin with polish and Beethoven with conviction. Marmontel recognizes Debussy's talent, but he also senses the boy's resistance to convention. Debussy can play the required pieces, but he does not seem to love them. He approaches Beethoven's sonatas with a kind of analytical detachment, as if he is studying them rather than inhabiting them. When asked to play a Chopin nocturne, he plays it beautifully, but with slight alterations to the phrasing that Marmontel finds unsettling. And when left alone at the piano, he drifts into his own world. A world of sounds that do not belong to any tradition Marmontel recognizes. Whole tone scales, pentatonic melodies, parallel chords moving like clouds. Marmontel does not understand where these ideas come from. They are not in the textbooks. They are not in the repertoire. They seem to emerge from Debussy's imagination fully formed, as if he is channeling something that has always existed but has never before been heard. In his teaching notes, Marmontel writes a phrase that will become famous. He doesn't like the piano much, but he does like music. It is a curious distinction, but an accurate one. For Debussy, the piano is not the goal. It is merely a tool, a means of accessing something larger. It is a box of colors, a collection of sounds, and what matters is not the virtuosity with which one plays, but the visions one creates. Debussy wins minor prizes in his early years. A second prize in solfège in 1876, a third prize in piano in 1877. These are respectable achievements, but they do not mark him as exceptional. There are other students more gifted at the keyboard, and as he grows older, it becomes clear that he will not have a career as a concert pianist. His technique is adequate, but not dazzling. His interpretations are thoughtful, but not commanding. And most importantly, he simply does not want it. What he wants is to compose. What he wants is to create sounds that have never been heard before. For theory and harmony, Debussy studies with Émile Durand, a composer steeped in the traditions of French academicism. Durand is a patient teacher, but he is also a firm believer in the rules. Music, he teaches, is not chaos. It is order. It is structure built on mathematical relationships. Chords have functions. Dissonances must resolve. Melodies must have clear phrases and cadences. These are not arbitrary conventions. They are the laws of nature, the physics of sound translated into aesthetic principles that have been refined over centuries. Durand teaches the rules carefully, the laws of voice leading that prevent awkward parallels, the proper resolution of dissonances that satisfies the ear's expectation, the architecture of classical form that gives a piece coherence and direction. He assigns exercises. Harmonize this melody in 4-part chorale style. Write a period in the style of Mozart. Compose a minuet with a trio. Debussy learns the rules. He memorizes them. He can execute them when required, but he does not revere them. He treats them like suggestions, like starting points for exploration rather than walls that must not be crossed. In harmony class, when given an exercise to complete, Debussy often submits progressions that technically follow the rules but sound strange. He uses modal scales instead of major and minor, He writes chord progressions that avoid clear tonal centers. He leaves dissonances unresolved, letting them hang in the air like questions without answers. Durand corrects these exercises. He marks them with red ink. He explains patiently why these progressions do not work. They violate the expectations that centuries of musical practice have established. They leave the listener unsatisfied. But Debussy is unconvinced. To his ears, they work perfectly. They simply work in a different way. In 1880, when Debussy is 18, he enters the composition class of Ernest Guiraud. This is the advanced class, the class for students who are serious about becoming professional composers. Guiraud is different from the other teachers. He is patient. He is curious. He does not dismiss Debussy's experiments out of hand. Guiraud himself is a composer of some reputation. He is best known for writing the orchestral recitatives that were added to Bizet's opera Carmen after Bizet's death. Recitatives that replaced the original spoken dialogue and allowed the work to be performed in major opera houses. He also completed Offenbach's unfinished opera Le Conte d'Hoffmann. Guiraud understands the practical side of composition, how to write for voices, how to orchestrate effectively, how to satisfy audiences and critics. But he also understands something else. He understands that the rules of composition are not laws of nature. They are conventions. Useful conventions, perhaps. Conventions that have proven their value, but conventions nonetheless. And he is willing to let his students explore beyond those conventions, as long as they understand what they are doing and why. One day, during a lesson, Guiraud asked Debussy to explain a particularly unusual harmonic progression he has written. The chords do not follow the expected voice-leading rules. They do not resolve in the traditional sense. They simply exist, and then move to the next chord in a way that defies explanation according to traditional harmonic theory. Guiraud does not scold. Instead, he asks gently, "What is your rule?" Debussy's answer is immediate and unhesitating. "Mon plaisir." My pleasure. For a moment, the room is silent. Then Guiraud smiles. It is a small smile, almost sad. The smile of a man who recognizes something he himself does not possess. He says quietly, "If you have genius, that will be enough." It is a moment of recognition, a benediction, a permission that Debussy will carry with him for the rest of his life. Genius does not obey. Genius creates its own rules. Genius answers to pleasure, to instinct, to the inner voice that says, "Yes, this is right," even when every textbook says otherwise. But even with Guiraud's blessing, Debussy faces a practical problem. To have a career as a composer in France, one must win recognition. One must win prizes. And the most prestigious prize of all, the prize that opens doors and confers legitimacy, is the Prix de Rome. The Prix de Rome is an old institution with a grand history. It was established in 1663 by Louis XIV, originally for painters and sculptors. By 1812, it had been expanded to include musicians. The competition is held annually. Young composers submit cantatas, short dramatic works for soloists, chorus, and orchestra based on a classical or biblical theme. The judges are the most distinguished composers and musicians in France, members of the Académie des Beaux-Arts. The winner receives a scholarship to study at the Villa Medici in Rome for 3 years, all expenses paid, with the sole obligation being to compose and to send one's work back to Paris for evaluation. For many composers, winning the Prix de Rome is the dream. It means financial security. It means prestige. It means international recognition. It means a head start in a competitive profession. Hector Berlioz won it, though it took him 4 attempts. Charles Gounod won it. Georges Bizet won it. Jules Massenet won it. And now, in the 1880s, it is Debussy's turn to try. But Debussy also needs to survive while preparing for the competition. And survival, for a young composer in Paris, means finding work, finding patrons, finding a way to eat while the music takes shape in the mind. He teaches piano lessons to wealthy children who show little talent and less interest. He sits in drawing rooms playing scales with bored adolescents who would rather be anywhere else. The pay is meager, the work is tedious. He bites his tongue when parents offer unsolicited opinions about music. He plays accompaniment for singers at rehearsals and soirees. He sight reads unfamiliar scores. He transposes on the spot. He fills in when regular accompanists cancel. The singers are often temperamental. The rehearsals run late, but the work pays. He copies music manuscripts by hand for publishers and composers. It is painstaking work, drawing each note with precision, each stem and flag and beam. His back aches, his eyes strain in the dim gaslight, but it pays. And then in 1880, an extraordinary opportunity arrives. Nadezhda von Meck, the wealthy Russian widow who famously patronized Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, is looking for a pianist. She wants someone to teach music to her children and to play piano duets with her during her travels across Europe. Someone recommends the young Debussy. An interview is arranged. Debussy is nervous. He has never met someone so wealthy. He does not know how to behave in aristocratic circles. But Madame von Meck is not what he expects. She is intelligent, cultured, genuinely passionate about music. She plays piano well herself. She asks him about his compositions. She listens to his answers with real interest. And somehow, despite his lack of social graces, despite his awkward manner and his shabby clothes, despite his inability to make the kind of flattering small talk that aristocrats expect, she is impressed. She hires him. For the next 3 summers, 1880, 1881, and 1882, Debussy travels with the von Meck family across Europe. They go to Switzerland, where the mountains rise like cathedrals and the air is thin and clear. They stay in grand hotels in Interlaken and Lausanne. They go to Italy, where ancient ruins crumble in golden light and the cities pulse with art and history. They visit Florence and Venice. And most importantly, they go to Russia. Russia, for Debussy, is a revelation. It is vast, endless. The estates where the von Meck family stays are like small kingdoms, thousands of acres of forests and fields, servants numbering in the dozens. A way of life that seems medieval in its grandeur and isolation. The main house at Bryloff has over 40 rooms. There are separate buildings for guests, for servants, for storage. There are gardens and stables and workshops. Debussy has his own room. It is larger than any apartment his family ever lived in. He has privacy. He has time to compose. He has access to pianos and to Madame von Meck's extensive music library. He can explore scores by composers he has never heard. Russian composers whose names mean nothing in France but who are creating extraordinary music. He hears things he has never heard before. He hears Russian folk songs sung by peasants in the fields, melodies that move in modes unfamiliar to French ears, scales that are neither major nor minor but something older, something that predates the classical system. The melodies loop and repeat with variations. They do not develop in the Western sense. They simply exist, like rain or wind, like phenomena of nature. He hears church bells ringing across vast distances, their overtones creating accidental harmonies that shimmer and fade. In Russia, bells are everywhere. Every village has a church. Every church has bells. And the Russian Orthodox tradition of bell ringing is complex, elaborate, almost orchestral. Different bells ring in patterns that interlock. And in the winter air, when sound carries for miles, you can hear multiple churches at once. Their bells creating harmonies that no one composed, but that are nonetheless beautiful. He hears the particular quality of Russian melancholy, that sweet sadness that permeates the music of Borodin and Mussorgsky, that acceptance of suffering as part of the texture of life, that depth of feeling that has no name in French, but that Russians call toska. It is more than sadness. It is a kind of existential longing, a sense that the world is beautiful and terrible at once, that joy and sorrow are inseparable. These sounds enter him quietly, and they stay. Years later, when he writes his own music, listeners will sometimes detect a kind of modal quality, a use of scales that feel neither major nor minor but something older. And part of that comes from those summers in Russia, from those long evenings listening to servants sing while the sun set over the steppes, from those winter nights when the bells rang through the frozen air. Madame von Meck is a curious woman. She is immensely wealthy. Her fortune comes from railway construction, but she is also deeply cultured and genuinely passionate about music. Her relationship with Tchaikovsky is famous. She supports him financially for 13 years, sending him an annual stipend that allows him to compose without worrying about money. But they have a strange arrangement. They never meet face to face. They correspond only by letter. She attends his concerts, but she sits in a box where he cannot see her. It is a relationship conducted entirely through words on paper and through music. With Debussy, her relationship is more direct. They play piano duets together, four-hand arrangements of symphonies and operas. She takes the bass part, he takes the treble. They sit side by side at the keyboard, their hands occasionally brushing as they play. They discuss music. She asks his opinions on composers and pieces. She plays him works by Tchaikovsky, symphonies that Debussy has never heard, songs that move him deeply. And Debussy, who is usually so guarded, who keeps his inner thoughts hidden even from close friends, finds himself opening up. He tells her about his ambitions. He confesses his doubts about the conservatoire's methods. He plays her his own compositions, small pieces, songs, experiments. She listens with genuine interest. She does not judge. She simply listens. And sometimes she says quietly, "That is beautiful." In 1880, Madame von Meck sends one of Debussy's early pieces, a piano work called Danse Bohemienne, to Tchaikovsky himself, asking for his opinion. She encloses a letter praising the young French composer. She is curious what the great Tchaikovsky will think. Tchaikovsky's response is polite but not encouraging. He writes, "It is a very pretty piece, but it is much too short. Not a single idea is expressed fully. The form is terribly shriveled, and it lacks unity." Debussy, when he learns of this judgment, is disappointed, but he is not crushed. Tchaikovsky is a genius, but he is also a product of his tradition. He expects music to develop ideas fully, to build to climaxes, to resolve satisfactorily. He believes in symphonic structure, in the architecture of sonata form. in the logic of theme and development. But Debussy is beginning to suspect that there might be other ways to organize sound, ways that do not require development and resolution, ways that simply exist, like a painting or a poem, ways that capture a moment or an atmosphere without needing to tell a story or make an argument. When Debussy returns to Paris each autumn, he is a little less French, a little more open to the idea that music might be something other than what the conservatoire teaches. That melody might move in ways that do not resolve. That harmony might shimmer instead of march. That beauty might be found not in perfection, but in imperfection, in ambiguity, in the space between certainty and doubt. Back at the Conservatoire, Debussy begins to prepare for the Prix de Rome. He knows the rules of the competition. He has studied past winners. He understands what the judges expect, and he knows that to win, he will have to temporarily suppress his more experimental impulses. He will have to write in a style that demonstrates technical mastery while remaining within the bounds of acceptable convention. In 1882, Debussy enters the competition for the first time. His cantata does not even make it past the preliminary round. He is eliminated early. It is a humiliation, but it is also a learning experience. He realizes that he has been too bold, too willing to let his own voice emerge. The judges are not ready for that. In 1883, he tries again. This time, his cantata is titled Le Gladiateur, the Gladiator. It is based on a text about an ancient Roman warrior facing death in the arena. Debussy's music is more conventional this time. He follows the expected forms. He writes dramatic arias and stirring choruses. He demonstrates that he can orchestrate effectively. The cantata makes it to the final round. The judges deliberate, and Debussy comes in second place. Second place is respectable. It shows promise. It proves that he is capable of writing in the approved style. But it is not enough. The prize, the scholarship, the ticket to Rome goes to someone else, a composer named Paul Vidal, who will go on to have a successful but unremarkable career. Debussy is frustrated. He has come so close, but he does not give up. He knows what he must do. He must write a cantata that satisfies the judges completely, that demonstrates technical mastery, that shows he can work within the established forms. He can save his experiments for later. For now, he must win the prize. In 1884, he enters the competition for the third time. His cantata is titled L'Enfant Prodigue, the Prodigal Son. It is based on the biblical parable, the story of a wayward child who leaves home, squanders his inheritance on reckless living, and returns in shame, only to be welcomed with open arms by his forgiving father. The text is sentimental. The form is traditional. There are distinct sections, arias for the soloists, choruses for the ensemble, orchestral interludes. Everything is as it should be. The orchestration is conventional but effective. The vocal writing is grateful. It allows the singers to show their skills without requiring them to do anything too unusual. But within those constraints, Debussy writes something genuinely moving. He infuses the music with real emotion. The father's welcome is tender. The son's remorse is palpable. The reconciliation feels earned. And there are hints, just hints, of the harmonic color and the melodic fluidity that will later define his mature style. A progression that lingers a moment longer than expected. A melody that curves in an unexpected way. Orchestral colors that shimmer rather than simply support. The judges notice. They hear talent. They hear craft. They hear a composer who understands the tradition and can work within it, but who also has something personal to say. On June 27, 1884, the results are announced. Debussy has won. 22 of the 28 votes go to him. Even Charles Gounod, one of the most famous composers in France, the man who wrote the opera Faust, casts his ballot in favor of the young man from Saint-Germain-en-Laye. But Debussy does not celebrate. On the Pont des Arts, the iron footbridge that spans the Seine near the Louvre, he waits for the official notification. Friends gather around him. They are excited. They congratulate him in advance. But Debussy is quiet. His face shows no joy. When the messenger arrives, when the official confirmation comes that he has indeed won the Prix de Rome, his first emotion is not relief or happiness, but dread. A cold wave of anxiety washes over him. He later describes the feeling in a letter. In that moment, I suddenly realized the boredom and the annoyance that comes with recognition. The prize brings obligation. It brings expectation. It brings a scholarship to the Villa Medici in Rome, a place where winners of the Prix de Rome are sent to study and compose in ideal conditions. For most young composers, it is the dream. The Villa Medici is beautiful. It is historic. It offers time and space and resources that few artists ever have. But for Debussy, who values freedom above all else, who resents authority, who trusts only his own instincts, it will feel like exile, a beautiful, suffocating exile where he is expected to produce work that pleases the same judges who have just validated his talent, work that demonstrates progress along conventional lines, work that proves he is becoming the kind of composer France needs. But Debussy is not becoming that kind of composer. He is becoming something else, something new, something that has never existed before. And Rome, for all its beauty and history, will only make that clearer. The Villa Medici sits on the Pincian Hill in Rome, one of the 7 hills of the ancient city, overlooking the Piazza di Spagna and the Spanish Steps. It is a Renaissance palace surrounded by gardens and fountains. Umbrella pines tower overhead. Marble statues stand in alcoves. The views across Rome are breathtaking. At sunset, the entire city glows golden. It should be paradise for an artist. The winners of the Prix de Rome, painters, sculptors, architects, musicians, leave here on generous stipends. Their rooms are spacious. Their meals are provided. They have access to studios and instruments. Their only responsibility is to create, to send their work back to Paris for evaluation once a year, to develop their craft in the shadow of antiquity and surrounded by beauty. Debussy arrives in January of 1885. He is 22 years old. He has never been outside of France except for those summers with Madame von Meck. Rome is exotic, overwhelming. The light is different. The language is incomprehensible. The food is unfamiliar. And he hates it almost immediately. He hates his fellow residents. The painters talk endlessly about light and composition and perspective, about Raphael and Michelangelo, about technique and theory. They argue about whether Impressionism is a legitimate movement or a passing fad. They critique each other's work with brutal honesty. Debussy finds them vulgar, superficial, boring. The sculptors are worse. They obsess over marble and bronze, over the chisel marks in ancient statues, over anatomical precision. They speak of the human form as if it were an engineering problem to be solved. Debussy, who cares nothing for visual art, who barely looks at paintings or sculptures, who lives entirely in the world of sound, cannot relate to them at all. He hates the rigid schedule, meals at fixed hours, social gatherings where residents are expected to mingle and network, formal dinners where everyone dresses properly and makes polite conversation. Debussy has never been good at small talk. He does not know how to flatter. He does not know how to charm. And he resents being forced to pretend. He hates Rome itself, the oppressive heat of summer, the humidity, the mosquitoes. The ancient ruins that everyone else finds inspiring leave him cold. He is not interested in history. He is not moved by architecture. He wants to be in Paris, in a cafe, surrounded by poets and musicians, arguing about Mallarmé and Verlaine. Most of all, he hates the requirement that he send compositions back to Paris each year. These envois, as they are called, must demonstrate progress. They must show that the young composer is maturing, refining his technique, moving toward the kind of grand, respectable music that France expects from its prize winners. They must be substantial works that can be evaluated by the judges and held up as examples of what the Prix de Rome produces. But Debussy is not interested in grand, respectable music. He is not interested in writing the kind of works that will please judges. He is interested in something else, something he cannot yet fully articulate, a kind of music that moves like water, that suggests rather than declares, that trusts silence as much as sound. In 1885, he works on a piece called Zuleima, a symphonic ode inspired by a poem by Heinrich Heine about a beautiful Eastern woman. The music is sensuous, exotic, harmonically adventurous. Debussy uses whole-tone scales. He experiments with orchestral colors. He writes melodies that do not resolve in expected ways. He sends the score back to Paris, and the professors in Paris are appalled. They listen to the work at a formal evaluation. They exchange glances. They shake their heads. And they write a report that is barely veiled contempt. At present, Monsieur Debussy seems to be afflicted with a desire to write music that is bizarre, incomprehensible, and impossible to execute. Bizarre, incomprehensible, impossible. Debussy receives this judgment in Rome. He is stung. He is angry. But he is also defiant. They do not understand. They cannot hear what he is trying to do. And rather than revise the work, rather than make it more acceptable, he destroys it. He tears up the score. Zuleima will never be performed. It will never be published. It will disappear as if the music itself rejected the judgment of those who could not hear it. The following year, he works on another piece. This one is called Printemps, Spring. It is a work for orchestra and chorus, a celebration of the season, music filled with bird song and flowering and renewal. But again, Debussy's harmonic language is unconventional. He uses parallel fifths. He avoids clear cadences. The music floats rather than marches. He sends it back to Paris. And this time, the criticism is even harsher. The professors complain about what they call vague impressionism, a term that is meant as an insult, but that will later define an entire movement. They warn him that this approach is extremely dangerous in works of art. They tell him he must focus on clarity, on structure, on traditional harmonic progression. Debussy is furious, frustrated. He feels misunderstood. He feels trapped. The Villa Medici, which should be a sanctuary, has become a prison. He takes a leave of absence in the spring of 1886. He returns to Paris for a few months. He breathes again, but he must return to Rome to fulfill his obligations. He goes back, but his heart is not in it. He composes little. He spends his time walking through the city, sitting in cafes, reading. He discovers the music of Palestrina and Orlando di Lasso, Renaissance polyphony with its flowing lines and modal harmonies. This music speaks to him. It moves in ways that classical music does not. It breathes. In March of 1887, Debussy has had enough. He has spent only 2 years of his 3-year scholarship, but he cannot bear it any longer. He writes to the director of the Villa Medici a polite letter thanking him for the opportunity, but explaining that he must return to Paris. He packs his belongings, and he leaves. He has learned what Rome had to teach him, which is that Rome has nothing to teach him. What he has learned instead is what he does not want. He does not want to write grand opera that shouts. He does not want to follow academic rules that explain feeling instead of revealing it. He does not want to be the next Gounod or the next Massenet. He wants something new, something French, something his own. And so he returns to Paris, penniless, unemployed, and filled with a vision that no one yet understands. He rents a small room in Montmartre, the neighborhood of artists and anarchists, where rent is cheap and expectations are low. The room is barely furnished, a narrow bed, a table, a chair, a small stove for heat, and an old upright piano that he somehow convinces the landlord to let him keep. He begins again, melody as line, harmony as color, rhythm as speech. The revolution is quiet at first, quiet but irreversible. Paris in the early 1890s is a city on the edge of transformation. The Eiffel Tower, built just a few years earlier for the Exposition Universelle of 1889, still shocks visitors with its brazen modernity. 300 meters of iron rising above the city, visible from everywhere, impossible to ignore. Some people call it beautiful. Others call it an abomination, but everyone agrees it represents something. The triumph of engineering over tradition, the future asserting itself over the past. Electric lights begin to replace gas lamps on the major boulevards. The first electric streetcars appear. Horse carriages still dominate the streets, but motor cars, strange, noisy machines that belch smoke, are beginning to appear. The telephone is no longer a novelty. Department stores, enormous temples of commerce, rise along the boulevards, Galeries, Lafayette, Le Bon Marché, Printemps. The air hums with a sense that the old world is dying and something new is being born. And nowhere is this feeling stronger than in the cafes and salons where artists gather. In the cafes of Montmartre and the Latin Quarter, painters and poets gather to argue about art. They drink absinthe, the green fairy, which is legal and popular and said to inspire visions. They smoke cigarettes and read their manifestos aloud. They speak of symbolism, of impressionism, of the need to break free from the tired conventions of the past. The symbolist poets, led by Stéphane Mallarmé and Paul Verlaine, reject realism. They are not interested in describing the world as it is. They want to evoke atmospheres, to suggest rather than declare, to use language not as a tool of communication, but as a kind of music. Their poems are deliberately obscure. They value ambiguity. They trust the reader to complete the meaning. The Impressionist painters, Monet, Renoir, Pissarro, have been exhibiting for nearly 20 years now. Their work is no longer as shocking as it once was, but it is still controversial. They paint light rather than objects. They use broken brushstrokes. They work on plain air, outdoors, capturing the changing qualities of atmosphere and time of day. They are not interested in history or mythology or moral lessons. They want to paint the world they see, the world of modern life, gardens and cafes and train stations, into this ferment, this glorious chaos. Claude Debussy steps with his notebooks full of fragments. He is 25 years old. He has no money. He has no steady work. He lives in a tiny room where he can hear his neighbors through the walls. He eats cheap meals, bread and cheese, soup from street vendors. He wears the same clothes day after day. But he has something more valuable than money. He has hunger. He has vision. And he has ears that hear what others do not. Through a friend, he is invited to attend the Tuesday evening salon at Stéphane Mallarmé's apartment on Rue de Rome. These gatherings are legendary. Mallarmé, a quiet, elegant man who teaches English at a lycée to pay his bills, holds court every Tuesday. Poets come, painters come, musicians come. They smoke, they drink tea or wine, and they listen as Mallarmé reads his latest work or discusses questions of aesthetics. Debussy attends for the first time in 1890. He is nervous. He does not know how to behave in intellectual circles. But Mallarmé is welcoming. He asks Debussy about his music. He listens to the answers with genuine interest. And when Debussy mentions that he is working on setting some poems to music, Mallarmé offers to show him new work. One evening, Mallarmé recites a poem called L'après-midi d'un faune, the afternoon of a faune. It is a strange, sensual poem about a mythological creature, half man, half goat, who wakes from a nap on a hot afternoon and wonders whether the nymphs he remembers encountering were real or merely a dream. The poem is deliberately ambiguous. It does not resolve. It does not explain. It simply evokes a state of mind, a mood, a moment suspended between waking and dreaming. Debussy listens, and something clicks. This is what he has been searching for. Poetry that does not declare but suggests. Language that moves like water. Form that breathes. He asks Mallarmé if he might someday write music inspired by the poem. Mallarmé smiles and says he would be honored. Through Mallarmé, Debussy meets other poets. Paul Verlaine, whose verses shimmer with ambiguity and melancholy. Pierre Louis, who becomes one of Debussy's closest friends. These men speak of art in ways that resonate with everything Debussy believes. They reject didacticism. They embrace mystery. They understand that beauty often lives in what is left unsaid. Verlaine gives him texts to set to music. Simple verses, impressionistic, melancholy. Debussy sets them not as dramatic declarations, but as intimate whispers. The vocal lines follow the natural rhythm of French speech. No forced stresses, no distortion of the language to fit a musical pattern. Instead, the music adapts to the words, follows their rise and fall, becomes one with them. The piano accompaniments do not support the voice so much as color it, like light falling on water. Debussy uses the sustain pedal in new ways, creating halos of sound, letting harmonies blur and shimmer. He writes arpeggios that do not resolve. He uses whole-tone scales that create a sense of floating. He leaves dissonances hanging in the air. These early songs, Ariette oubliée, Fête galante, 5 poèmes de Baudelaire, are not commercially successful. They do not win prizes. They do not make Debussy famous. Publishers are reluctant to take them. when they are performed. In small salons and private concerts, audiences are often confused, but a few listeners understand. A few recognize that something new is happening. The composer Ernest Chausson, who is wealthy and generous, becomes a patron and friend. The poet Pierre Louis writes enthusiastic letters. And slowly, very slowly, word begins to spread that there is a young composer in Paris writing songs unlike anything anyone has heard before. And then, in 1889, something extraordinary happens. Paris hosts another Exposition Universelle, a world's fair celebrating the centennial of the French Revolution. The Eiffel Tower is the centerpiece, newly built for the occasion. But the real treasures are scattered across the fairgrounds in pavilions representing cultures from around the globe. There are exhibits from Africa, from the Americas, from the Far East. There are replicas of villages. There are displays of art and craft. There are performances of music and dance. It is meant to showcase the diversity of the world, and also, though no one says this explicitly, to demonstrate the superiority of Western civilization and the benefits of colonialism. In the section devoted to the Dutch East Indies, on the Esplanade des Invalides, a Javanese village has been constructed. Bamboo houses, palm trees, a small temple, and inside, visitors can watch dancers performing intricate movements to the accompaniment of a gamelan ensemble. Debussy hears about the Javanese pavilion from a friend. He is curious. He has never heard music from that part of the world. One afternoon, he walks across the city to the Esplanade. He enters the pavilion, and his life changes. The gamelan is unlike any music he has ever encountered. It is not an orchestra in the Western sense. It is a collection of instruments made primarily of bronze and wood, gongs of different sizes, metallophones that shimmer and chime, xylophones with resonating tubes, drums that pulse without insisting, a few bowed strings, a flute. The music they make together has no melody in the Western sense, no tune that rises and falls and resolves. Instead, there are layers. Each instrument plays a repeating pattern, but the patterns interlock. They create cycles. And within those cycles, there are subtle variations. Notes are added or dropped. Rhythms shift slightly. The effect is mesmerizing, like watching water flow or clouds drift, like hearing time itself made audible. There is no dominant chord pulling everything toward resolution. There is no hierarchy of voices where one instrument leads and the others follow. All the parts are equally important, and yet, somehow, they create a unified whole, a texture, a shimmer, a kind of sonic weather that changes constantly but never dramatically. Debussy returns to the Javanese pavilion again and again over the course of the exposition. He sits for hours, he listens. He closes his eyes and lets the sound wash over him. And in his mind, a new world of possibilities opens. What if Western music, with its obsession with progression and development, with its need to always move toward something, with its hierarchies and resolutions and dramatic climaxes, what if that entire system is just one way of organizing sound? What if there are other ways? What if harmony could shimmer without resolving? What if melody could float without anchoring? What if rhythm could pulse without marching? What if music could simply exist, like the gamelan, creating atmospheres and textures rather than telling stories or expressing emotions in the dramatic sense? He will later write in an essay his thoughts about what he heard. Javanese music obeys laws of counterpoint that make Palestrina seem like child's play. And if one listens without being prejudiced by one's European ears, one will find a percussive charm that forces one to admit that our own music is not much more than a barbarous kind of noise more fit for a traveling circus. It is a radical statement, provocative, designed to offend. But Debussy believes it, or at least he believes that Western music has become too limited, too bound by its own conventions, too convinced of its own superiority. The gamelan will haunt him. For the rest of his life, its sound will echo in his imagination. Years later, when he composes the piano piece Pagodes, part of his set of Estampe, he will evoke the sound of those gongs and metallophones, not by imitating them directly, but by capturing their spirit. The piece will move in cycles, it will shimmer, it will refuse to resolve in the ways that French audiences expect. It will use pentatonic scales, 5-note scales that sound neither major nor minor but ancient, timeless. And the critics will not know what to make of it. They will call it exotic, mysterious, strange. Some will love it, others will dismiss it, but no one will be able to ignore it. But the gamelan is not the only revelation of 1889. That same summer, Debussy does something that he has been both anticipating and dreading for years. He travels to Bayreuth, the Bavarian town where Richard Wagner built his festival house, his temple of Gesamtkunstwerk, the total artwork. Wagner has been dead for 6 years, but his influence over European music is immense. Almost every young composer feels compelled to come to terms with Wagner, to accept him or reject him, to build on his innovations or to find a way beyond them. Debussy goes to hear Tristan und Isolde, the opera that changed the course of Western music with its radical chromaticism, its deferred resolutions, its sensual, overwhelming emotional power. He also hears Parsifal, Wagner's final opera, a mystical meditation on redemption and the Holy Grail. At first, Debussy is dazzled. The orchestration is magnificent. Every instrument is used with such precision, such clarity, such purpose. The harmonic language is intoxicating. Wagner showed that an opera could be more than a series of pretty arias strung together with recitative. It could be continuous, organic, a single unbroken flow of sound and drama where the orchestra carries as much meaning as the voices. The leitmotif technique, where specific musical themes represent characters or ideas or emotions, allows Wagner to create a complex web of associations. When a theme returns in a new context, it carries the weight of everything that has happened before. The music has memory. It creates a kind of psychological depth that opera had never achieved before. Debussy sits in the dark theater and lets the music wash over him. And for a while, he is a believer. This is the future of music. This is what opera should be. But as the days pass and Debussy attends more performances, something shifts. He begins to feel the weight of Wagner's music, the sheer density of it, the relentless intensity, the way every phrase seems to demand a response, to push toward the next climax, to never allow the listener to simply be. Wagner's music, Debussy realizes, is like a sermon. It insists, it explains, it overwhelms. It does not trust the listener to feel without being told what to feel. Every emotion is underlined. Every moment of significance is highlighted. The orchestra swells. The voices strain. The brass section blares. And when there is silence, it is always temporary, always leading to the next eruption of sound. Debussy begins to understand what he does not want. He does not want to overwhelm. He wants to suggest. He wants to invite rather than command. He wants to create music that allows the listener space to breathe, space to dream, space to complete the meaning in their own imagination. Wagner's music is like a painting that fills every inch of the canvas, that leaves no room for the eye to rest. Debussy wants to create music that is more like a Japanese watercolor, where empty space is as important as the brushstrokes, where what is not painted suggests as much as what is. He returns to Paris with a new determination. He will learn from Wagner, yes. Wagner showed that opera could be continuous, that the orchestra could be more than mere accompaniment, that harmony could be expressive and fluid. These lessons are valuable, but he will not become a Wagnerian. He will not write Tristan in French. He will not try to out-Wagner Wagner. Instead, he will create something different, something French, something that trusts silence as much as sound, something that whispers rather than shouts. And so he begins to work. He begins to sketch ideas for pieces that move in new ways. He begins to experiment with harmonies that do not resolve. He begins to trust his instincts rather than his training. In 1893, he composes his string quartet in G minor. It is his first major chamber work, and it is nothing like the quartets of Beethoven or Brahms or even the more recent quartets of Franck or Fauré. The form is cyclical. A theme introduced in the first movement returns in later movements, but transformed, seen from different angles, like walking around a sculpture. The harmonies shimmer, modal scales appear. The rhythms pulse without always emphasizing downbeats. The four voices, two violins, viola, cello, intertwine like threads in a fabric rather than like debaters in a conversation. They are equals. They create texture rather than argument. When the quartet premieres, critics are divided. Some hear genius, others hear confusion. The conservative critic Camille Beleg writes that the music is incomplete, incoherent, and incomprehensible. But younger listeners, composers, and musicians who are hungry for something new, they understand. They recognize that a door has opened. And then, in 1894, comes the work that will change everything. Debussy has been thinking about Mallarmé's poem L'après-midi d'un faune for years. He has sketched ideas. He has tried different approaches. Should it be a song? An orchestral piece? Something for piano? Finally, he decides. He will write a prelude. A prelude for orchestra. Not a setting of the poem. Not program music in the traditional sense. Not a piece that tells the story or illustrates specific images. Instead, an evocation, an atmosphere, a musical equivalent of the faun's drowsy, uncertain state of mind. That moment between waking and dreaming when memory and imagination blur into one. The piece begins with a single flute line, unaccompanied, chromatic, curling and falling like smoke. It is one of the most famous openings in all of music. And it is radical not because it is complicated, but because it is simple. It does not announce. It does not declare. It breathes. The melody uses the tritone, the interval of 3 whole steps, which medieval theorists called the devil's interval. But Debussy does not use it for dramatic tension. He uses it for color, for ambiguity. The flute line rises and falls without establishing a clear tonal center. Are we in E major, C sharp major, neither, both? The music floats. Gradually, the orchestra enters. strings and harp adding shimmer, horns adding warmth, woodwinds weaving counter melodies. The music unfolds without urgency. There is no dramatic conflict. There is no heroic struggle. There is no narrative arc. There is only the sensation of heat and desire and dreams half remembered. The harmonies never fully resolve. They move in parallel. They shimmer and blur. The orchestration is transparent. You can hear every line, every color, but they blend into something larger than the sum of their parts. When Prélude à l'après-midi d'un faune première on December 22nd, 1894, at the Société Nationale de Musique, the audience does not know what to make of it. Some people applaud enthusiastically. Others sit in stunned silence, not sure if they should clap. The critics write confused reviews. One of them scoffs, "The faun must have had a terrible afternoon." But a few listeners understand that they have witnessed something unprecedented. The composer Pierre Boulez will later say, "The flute of the faun brought new breath to the art of music. Music began to beat with a new pulse." Debussy has written the first piece of truly modern music. He has shown that it is possible to create coherence and beauty without relying on traditional harmonic progression. That suggestion can be more powerful than declaration. That space and silence can be as important as sound. He is 32 years old, and he is just beginning. Success does not come easily or quickly. Fame does not arrive overnight. But slowly, gradually, Debussy begins to build a reputation as a composer who cannot be ignored, as a composer who is doing something genuinely new. The years between 1894 and 1900 are difficult. Debussy is still poor. He still lives in small rooms. He still teaches piano lessons to pay rent. But he is composing steadily, and his works are beginning to be performed and published. He continues to write songs, exquisite settings of Verlaine and Baudelaire and Louis. The songs do not sound like Schubert or Schumann or even Fauré. They are something entirely French. The vocal lines follow the natural contours of the language. The piano parts create atmospheres. Nothing is explained. Everything is suggested. He writes for the piano, pieces that explore new textures, new ways of using the sustain pedal to create halos of sound. He writes the Suite Bergamasque, a set of 4 piano pieces that includes the shimmering moonlit Clair de Lune. The piece will become one of the most beloved works in the piano repertoire. But when Debussy first writes it in 1890, he is not satisfied. He revises it. He sets it aside. He does not publish it until 1905. Clair de Lune, Moonlight, takes its title from a poem by Paul Verlaine. The poem speaks of a faded landscape under pale moonlight, of dancers in the park, of melancholy disguised as gaiety. And Debussy's music captures that atmosphere perfectly. The melody floats, the harmonies shimmer. The piece moves like water, like light on water, never quite resolving, always drifting towards something just out of reach. But his greatest ambition is still opera. He has always believed that theater is where music can achieve its highest expression. But what kind of opera? The grand historical spectacles of Meyerbeer leave him cold. The sentimental melodramas of Puccini are not to his taste. And Wagner, for all his genius, represents a path that Debussy cannot follow. What Debussy wants is an opera that whispers instead of shouts, an opera where the voices follow the natural rhythms of speech, an opera where the orchestra does not accompany but inhabits, an opera that trusts mystery, an opera that does not explain everything, And then, sometime between May of 1892 and May of 1893, Debussy discovers a play by the Belgian symbolist Maurice Maeterlinck. It is called Pelléas et Mélisande. He reads it, and he knows. This is it. This is the opera he has been waiting for. Script continues to 12,000 plus words with sections on Pelléas, La Mer, personal scandals, illness, war, death, and legacy, following the same rich, detailed narrative style. Maeterlinck's play is set in the imaginary kingdom of Allemande, a shadowy, dreamlike place where time seems suspended. Prince Golaud is hunting in the forest when he encounters a mysterious young woman named Mélisande. She is crying by a well. She will not say where she comes from or who she is. Golaud marries her and brings her to his grandfather, King Arkel's castle. There, Mélisande meets Golaud's half-brother, Pelléas, a gentle, melancholy young man. They are drawn to each other. Is it love? Is it merely loneliness? The play does not explain. It only suggests. And Golaud's jealousy grows. Slowly at first, then violently. He spies on them. He questions his young son from a previous marriage, forcing the boy to watch Pelléas and Mélisande through a window. The child sees them sitting close together, but nothing more. And still, Golaud cannot bear the uncertainty. Finally, unable to control his rage, Golaud kills Pelléas with his sword. Mélisande flees into the castle. She gives birth to a daughter and dies. And Golaud never learns the truth. He never knows whether they were lovers or merely friends. The mystery remains, forever unresolved. It is perfect. The play is everything Debussy believes opera should be. The characters speak in simple, direct prose. No flowery speeches, no grand declarations. They say only what is necessary, and in the spaces between their words, in their silences, the real drama lives. Debussy begins to adapt the play immediately. He does not write an original libretto. He simply removes a few scenes that feel redundant. He cuts some of Maeterlinck's longer descriptions, but mostly he sets the text as it is, prose, not poetry, letting the rhythms of natural speech guide the vocal lines. The work takes 10 years. 10 years of sketching, revising, doubting, returning. He composes each scene carefully, searching for the exact balance between voice and orchestra. The voices do not sing in the traditional operatic sense. They declaim. They intone. They follow the inflections of spoken French, rising when questions are asked, falling when statements are made, never distorting the language to fit a musical pattern. The orchestra provides the emotional undercurrent. It does not accompany the voices so much as comment on them. It reveals what the characters cannot or will not say. When Mélisande speaks of feeling sad, the orchestra shows us the depth of that sadness. When Golaud grows jealous, we hear it in the darkening harmonies before he speaks a word. In 1898, the Opéra Comique finally agrees to stage Pelléas et Mélisande. Debussy finishes the orchestration. He attends rehearsals. Everything is proceeding smoothly. The singers are learning their roles. The orchestra is rehearsing. A premiere date is set for April of 1902. And then disaster strikes. Debussy had promised Maeterlinck, back when he first asked permission to set the play, that the role of Mélisande would go to the soprano Georgette Leblanc. Leblanc was Maeterlinck's lover. She was eager to originate the role. She had been preparing for years. But when the time came to cast the opera, the director of the Opéra Comique chose instead a Scottish soprano named Mary Garden. Garden was younger. Her voice had a quality that the director found ideal for the mysterious, childlike Mélisande. Her French accent was not perfect, but that imperfection somehow suited the character's otherworldly quality. Debussy agreed with the choice. He heard Garden sing and knew she was right for the role. Leblanc was dismissed. Maeterlinck was furious. He felt betrayed. He demanded explanations. He threatened legal action. He went to Debussy's apartment and berated him. Debussy's wife Emma intervened, and Debussy himself remained seated, calm, refusing to be provoked. On April 13, 1902, 2 weeks before the premiere, Le Figaro published a letter from Maeterlinck. In it, he disowned the opera entirely. He wrote that this work was strange and hostile to him. He wished only for its immediate and decided failure. The premiere on April 30th, 1902, is tumultuous. Someone has distributed a parody of the libretto throughout the audience, mocking the simplicity of the language. People laugh at the wrong moments. They mock the young boy's lines. They make fun of Mary Garden's accent. The famous music critic Pierre Lalo writes afterward that he does not hear, not see, not smell the sea in Debussy's music. But then something remarkable happens. Over the following weeks, more people come. Word spreads, musicians and artists attend. They recognize what the first night audience could not. This is not a failure. This is a revolution. By the 7th performance, the theater is turning people away. Within a few years, Pelléas et Mélisande becomes a staple of the repertoire, and Maeterlinck himself, 18 years later in 1920, finally attends a performance. He confesses that he was entirely wrong, and Debussy was 1,000 times right. With the success of Pelléas, Debussy enters his most productive period. He is 40 years old. Commissions arrive. Publishers want his work. Orchestras program his pieces. He is no longer poor. He is no longer ignored. He is finally recognized as one of the leading composers in France. He writes the nocturnes for orchestra, 3 pieces titled Nuages, Fête, and Sirène. Clouds, festivals, sirens. They evoke atmospheres. Nuages captures the slow drift of clouds across the sky. Fête pulses with parade energy. Sirènes adds a wordless female chorus, voices that shimmer like the mythological creatures luring sailors. Then comes La Mer, 3 symphonic sketches for orchestra. He begins composing it in 1903 while staying with his wife Lily at a small house in Villeneuve-la-Guillard. But by the time he finishes it, everything in his life has changed. In 1904, Debussy meets Emma Bardac. She is the wife of a wealthy banker. She is cultured, musical, sophisticated. She had previously been the mistress of Gabriel Fauré. She understands the world of composers and poets, and she understands Debussy in ways that Lily never could. They begin an affair. When Lily discovers the truth, she is devastated. On October 14, 1904, 5 days before their 5th wedding anniversary, she walks to the Place de la Concorde and shoots herself in the chest. She survives. The bullet lodges in her spine where it will remain for the rest of her life. But the scandal is immediate and overwhelming. Debussy's friends turn against him. Paul Dukas, André Messager, many others refuse to speak to him. Even Maurice Ravel, never close to Debussy, joins others in contributing to a fund to support the deserted Lily. Newspapers report the attempted suicide. Society is shocked. Debussy and Emma flee to England. They go first to Jersey, then to Eastbourne on now the south coast. And there, At the Grand Hotel with the sound of the English Channel outside his window, Debussy finishes La Mer. The work is in 3 movements. From dawn to noon on the sea, play of the waves, dialogue of the wind and the sea. Debussy draws more inspiration from paintings and literature than from actually observing the ocean. The cover of the published score features Hokusai's Great Wave. The influence of the gamelan is there in the shimmering textures, in the lack of traditional development, in the sense of cycles rather than progress. When La Mer premieres on October 15, 1905, it is not well received. Critics complain. The scandal affects reception, but La Mer endures. Within years, it becomes one of Debussy's most performed works. In 1905, Emma gives birth to their daughter, Claude Emma, nicknamed Chouchou. For her, Debussy writes Children's Corner, 6 piano pieces filled with play and tenderness. In 1908, after their divorces are finalized, Debussy and Emma marry. He continues composing at an extraordinary rate. 2 books of images for piano, 2 books of Prélude containing some of his greatest achievements. Des Pas sur la Neige, The Girl with the Flaxen Hair, The Sunken Cathedral, Fireworks. Each prelude is a miniature tone poem with titles printed at the end in parentheses as if they were afterthoughts. By 1910, Debussy is widely recognized as France's leading composer, but success brings anxiety. He polishes pages for months. At night, he walks the quays of the Seine, listening to water move under bridges as if it were harmony. In 1909, pain interrupts Debussy's days. A persistent ache in his rectum. He ignores it. But by early 1909, there is bleeding, daily bleeding. He sees a doctor who prescribes exercise and diet changes. Debussy largely ignores this advice. The pain worsens. He begins relying on morphine and cocaine to cope. In a letter, he describes never stopping suffering miserably and needing a variety of tranquilizers at the price of total stupor. For 6 years, he lives like this. He composes when he can, but the illness is always there. In summer 1915, the diagnosis becomes clear: rectal cancer, advanced. On December 7, 1915, Debussy undergoes one of the first colostomy operations. The procedure is crude. Then comes radiation treatment, pellets and tubes filled with radium inserted into his body. The treatments are agonizingly painful. The doctors don't yet know optimal exposure times. Debussy writes that radium abuses its right to be mysterious. In 1916, he composes almost nothing. Distraught and depressed, he writes, "Since Claude Debussy is no longer writing music, he has no excuse for being alive." But then, somehow, he finds strength. In summer 1917, he writes 3 sonatas, one for cello and piano, one for flute, viola, and harp, one for violin and piano. They are part of a projected series of 6. He will never finish the others. But these 3 are extraordinary, not lush, not impressionistic. They are lean, clear, distilled. The music of a man who has stripped away everything unnecessary. He also writes the etudes for piano, 12 pieces exploring technical challenges. They are difficult, demanding, but also beautiful. In August 1914, war engulfs Europe. Paris darkens under threat. Debussy is too old and too ill to fight, but he feels the war's weight. Friends die. Young men disappear into trenches. Food becomes scarce. Coal becomes scarce. Winter, 1916, is brutal. Emma keeps the household running. Chouchou practices scales. Debussy, wrapped in blankets, corrects proofs. He writes Berceuse Héroïque in tribute to Belgium. He writes about defending French culture. He signs letters Claude Debussy, musicien français. After decades resisting nationalism, he finally embraces his Frenchness. By 1917, he is bedridden much of the time. He gives his last public performance on September 14th, playing his new violin sonata with violinist Gaston Poulet. It is exquisite. The audience knows they are witnessing something final. In March 1918, Germany launches a massive offensive. They bring up the Paris gun, a huge cannon that shells Paris from 80 miles away. Night after night, shells fall. Buildings collapse. Debussy cannot flee. He is too weak. He lies in his bed at 24 Square du Bois de Boulogne. Emma sits with him. Chouchou plays quietly nearby. Outside, shells explode in the distance. On the evening of March 25, 1918, Claude Debussy dies. He is 55 years old. The funeral is small. Paris is under bombardment. Only close friends attend. His body goes to Père Lachaise Cemetery. One contemporary writes that his only funeral march was played by Germany's Big Bertha. The following year, his body is moved to Passy Cemetery. Debussy had wished to rest, among trees and the birds. Passy is green, peaceful, quiet. Emma will join him eventually. And Chouchou, sweet Chouchou, dies just 1 year after her father. She is 13, a victim of the diphtheria epidemic. Her doctor administers the wrong treatment. The family is reunited in stillness. Debussy's influence flows quietly through the 20th century. Maurice Ravel refines his colors into something even more jewel-like. Igor Stravinsky absorbs his rhythmic freedom. Béla Bartók hears permission to explore folk traditions. Olivier Messiaen discovers in his harmonies seeds of new approaches to tonality. But Debussy's influence extends beyond classical music. Jazz musicians hear in his chords a kind of color that speaks to them. Bill Evans plays Debussy's preludes and absorbs their open harmonies, their refusal to resolve, their sense of space. Herbie Hancock and Keith Jarrett do the same. Film composers adopt his shimmering orchestral textures. Bernard Herrmann and John Williams use his techniques to evoke atmosphere, to suggest rather than declare. And ordinary listeners know Clair de Lune. They know the opening flute of L'après-midi d'un faune. They know the shimmer of La Mer. They may not know the history. They may not know the theory. But they know the feeling. They know the beauty. Debussy taught us that silence is not emptiness, but a partner in sound. That beauty may whisper. That emotion may arrive as a shade of light. That music does not always need to march toward resolution. Sometimes it can simply be. More than a century after his birth, his music still rises over the world like moonlight on water, unresolved, luminous, breathing. He once wrote that music begins where words are powerless. Perhaps that is why his story never ends. Each note he left behind continues to hover in the air, inviting us to listen, inviting us to dream, inviting us to remember that the most profound truths are often the ones that cannot be spoken, only felt. And so, the story of Claude Debussy drifts into silence. His music reminds us that beauty lives in nuance, and that even the quietest sound can carry a universe of feeling. If you enjoyed this journey, let yourself rest a little longer. There are more lives, more dreams, more music waiting for you here. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to The Sleeping Tones, and let the next story carry you into sleep. Good night.